The 2017 Cleveland Browns were by far one of the worst teams the NFL had ever seen. They became the second team in NFL history to have a winless season and the first team to have back-to-back seasons with 15 or more losses. They were terrible, and today we will revisit this team to see how bad they really were. Let's start off by looking at the Browns the previous season and the moves they made throughout the offseason to try and improve. The Browns went 1-15 in 2016. Their best player at the time was their left tackle, Joe Thomas. He was the only player on the Browns who was a Pro Bowler that season. That's kind of sad. No shade to Thomas, but if an offensive lineman is your best player, you might have a problem. And for the Browns, it was clearly the case. So after having a terrible season, what did the Browns plan on doing in the offseason to get better? Well, let's see. The Browns general manager at the time was a man named Sashi Brown. 2016 was his first season as the Browns GM, and it was off to a horrendous start. In the offseason, he had plenty of decisions to make. Who was he going to sign in free agency? Who was he going to draft? And who was he going to get rid of? Let's start off by seeing how the draft went for Cleveland. In the 2017 NFL Draft, the Cleveland Browns selected Myles Garrett, which was a good pick. Garrett was a beast in Texas A&M and could help turn the Browns franchise around. As great of a pick that was, Brown also missed out on some players who were 10 times more valuable than Garrett. But who could have Sashi Brown possibly passed up on? Only the greatest quarterback in the NFL right now, Patrick Mahomes, one of the greatest running backs in the league, Christian McCaffrey, and a star wide receiver, Davante Adams. Those are just three big names he could have drafted but decided not to. Now granted, those guys weren't going to change the franchise around in one season, but I speak for everyone when I say they could have done a better job than the team the Browns had by the start of the next season. This was also the same year the Browns drafted DeShone Kizer, and I don't think we really need to talk about him or how good of a pick that was. As for signings, well, Sashi Brown was on field day when it came to the staff. Brown fired the defensive coordinator, 5 assistant coaches, and the defensive line coach. The man got rid of half the staff and replaced them with guys who as of today are either out of the league or coach a team in another football league. Very few of them are still in the NFL, which goes to show you how some of these coaches were not the best. In free agency, the Browns made a few moves. The notable signings were Kenny Britt, Brett Maher, Marcus Martin, Tyvis Powell, and James Wright. The Browns' grade that offseason was a C+, which isn't the greatest, but it wasn't as bad as the results the following season. The Cleveland Browns' regular season was awful. They finished the season going 0-16. Looking at some of their games, majority of them were blowouts, but there were a few where they had a chance. Their closest game was in Week 3 where they lost by 3 points against the Indianapolis Colts. 2 of their games also went into overtime, but they couldn't quite hang on. What's ironic is that throughout the preseason, they won every single game. Now granted, teams aren't trying their hardest, but still, the fact they were able to win all their games was a good sign that they would win at least one game, right? Well, clearly not. DeShone Kizer was the man who the Browns believed would get the job done. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about him, but I think it's best we take a look at his stats. In 2017, DeShone Kizer threw for a little under 2,900 yards with 11 touchdowns and a whopping 22 interceptions. Yes, you heard me correctly. DeShone Kizer threw 22 interceptions that season. His touchdown percentage was 2.3%, while his interception percentage was 4.6%. He doubled the number of interceptions compared to touchdowns. That would be Kizer's first and last season as an everyday starter for any NFL team. This man is now into NFTs. He went from the NFL to NFTs. As for other parts of their team, like the offensive line, it was mediocre. Remember when I told you about Joe Thomas and how much of a beast he was? Well, he got injured that season and only played in 7 games. To make matters even worse, 2017 was his final season in the NFL. He announced his retirement in 2018. Looking at other parts of the Browns' offense, it was not too pleasant. They had Isaiah Crowell as their starting running back. He was an above-average player as he had 853 rushing yards with 2 touchdowns and averaged 4 yards per attempt. He only lasted one more season in the NFL after 2017 and was then out of the league for good. Their wide receivers weren't looking too great. One of them was Josh Gordon. Now, Gordon used to be a beast in the NFL. He was once a top 10 wide receiver in football. Besides Joe Thomas a few years ago, Josh Gordon was arguably their best player. But then he got suspended for 2 seasons following a violation of league substance abuse policy. And when he came back in 2017, he wasn't really the same. In 5 games, he had 335 receiving yards with just 1 touchdown. His career was never the same after that suspension. He bounced around teams and was last seen on an NFL roster in 2022 with the Tennessee Titans. And looking at their tight end, the main starter was Randall Telfer. Looking at his stats, he had played in 14 games and had 36 yards with 3 receptions. Yeah, that was his last season in the NFL after 2017. As for the Browns' defense, it was one of the worst in the league. They ranked 31st in the entire league. They allowed 410 points, over 5,000 yards, and a combine of 42 touchdowns if we look at passing and rushing. This Browns team was so bad that they had fans showing up to games like this. ESPN literally interviewed a 104-year-old woman who was a die-hard Browns fan, and she said the team was a joke. Despite being the worst team in the NFL, the Browns did not have the lowest attendance. They were 24th in attendance in 2017 with an average crowd of over 63,000 people. But most of the fans who came to the games were mainly there to hold up signs and pray for a miracle. It was a huge mess for Cleveland, and I am 100% sure their fans have tried to forget this season in particular since it was their only season, losing all 16. Here's a question I'm sure you're probably asking yourself. What happened to the Browns after 2017? I'm talking about the staff and the players. Well, a lot changed. All those guys I mentioned and what happened to their career afterwards is a great summary to what happened to the players. These guys were either unknown, unproven players or were once well known and proven but had fallen off. The Browns would fire their general manager Sashi Brown, and I don't think an explanation is needed. The Browns only won 1 game under Sashi Brown. That in itself should tell you why he got fired. One guy who surprisingly didn't quit his job or got fired after that season was Hugh Jackson. I'm sure both the Browns and Jackson were thinking of parting ways. But no, that was not the case. He came for another year and then got fired 7 games into the next season. But the Browns would turn around. The very next season they went 7-8. It was the first time they had not finished last in their division since 2010. And then as we all know, the Browns would go on to make the playoffs in 2020 and then have a couple of mediocre seasons. But in the end, we can all agree that the 2017 Cleveland Browns were one of the worst teams in NFL history.